In this video, we're going to introduce emotion from chapter 9. By the end of this short video, you should be able to identify the 6 main emotions that Paul Eckman identified through his research. You will also be able to identify the basic components of the limbic system and explain Lisa Feldman Barrett's theory of constructed emotion or psychological constructivism. Now, when you look here at this image, can you identify the emotions that each of these individuals is expressing? Well, according to Paul Eckman, everybody across the world, across cultures, can identify these basic emotions. So according to Eckman, the fact that people all over the world can identify these basic emotions suggests that these emotions must be innate, that we're born with them. So he did the bulk of the research on these facial expressions. Now, if we look here, what emotion do you think that this woman is expressing? Probably suggested maybe anger. How about this one? Fear. How about this lady? What is she expressing with that facial expression? Disgust. And down here in the bottom left-hand corner, surprise. This one's definitely straightforward. Happiness. And then here we have sadness. So again, according to Eckman, these facial expressions are universal and they're tied to emotions that we feel. These emotions are also part of Jane Lang's theory that suggests emotions occur as a result of our physiological reactions to events. So we see something, we have a physiological reaction, and then we have an emotion that results. But in order for this theory to be correct, there needs to be certain brain regions that are consistently associated with specific emotions, and therein lies the problem. There are also some other problems with this theory in that other researchers have not been able to replicate Eckman's culturally diverse representation of these emotions. Some saying that in remote areas of the world where he showed people these images and asked them to identify language or identify an emotion, that they were kind of given choices. And so, of course, if you're given choice A or choice B, it's easier to make a correct identification with what Western civilization would identify as the emotion. So when we get into the neuroscience of emotions, the limbic system is often brought up. Now, the limbic system is a group of structures that are thought to work together to present our emotions or to cause our emotions. And you can see there's a variety. All these different areas listed here are today, along with probably some others, are suggested to be involved in this limbic system. Now, when I was in graduate school doing my PhD, the neuroanatomist that taught us about anatomy was a year-long class with different professors having their specialty at different times throughout the year. He did not believe in the limbic system. And, you know, I can see both sides, and we'll talk kind of a little bit about that. But I think part of the problem is that, you know, it started with a core group of brain structures, and it's evolved into being so much of the brain being called the limbic system. And if that's the case, is there really a limbic system, or is there something else? But just because I do think it's important for you to... Now, since this idea of the limbic system has evolved over time and there's different models that incorporate different areas of the brain, I'm going to hold you responsible for just the very basic ones, the ones that have kind of been there since the beginning in what we call that limbic system. And so here I have a little picture to help you remember those structures. It's a hippo and a hat. So what do you think that hippo stands for? If we look up here at the structures that are labeled, it's probably that hippocampus, right? So here we see that hippocampus, which we talked about in the anatomy chapter. We'll talk about again when we talk about memory. And so hopefully that's a little cue to you that yes, the hippocampus, when we think of hippocampus, we should think of memory, the formation of new memories. That's where we're going to encode and store information. It gives us a representation of the world, which could be very important in the formation of memories. Now, what do you think that H is going to stand for? It's going to stand for that hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus, although it's tiny, it is mighty. We've already talked about it in sleep and reproduction. It's involved in so many different behaviors, those drives that are vital to survival. We also know that it controls hormonal release from the pituitary, and then that's going to control hormonal release from all the different endocrine glands. So because of that, it can control the hormones that can make you angry or exhilarated, and those help form our emotional responses. So what do you think the A stands for? If you look up here again at these structures, think when we were talking about that anatomy, what did we say is involved in those emotional responses? The amygdala. So remember, with the amygdala, we relate to especially fear, our emotions of fear. It has pathways that connect to the hippocampus as well as the prefrontal cortex. And so it can start that sympathetic nervous system response, which is that fight or flight response, which is our part of our fear response, right? And then the prefrontal cortex also has a system where it tells that amygdala to stop. And so an overactive amygdala can lead to anxiety and other problems. And then the T is going to be that thalamus. The thalamus takes in all that incoming sensory information except for that sense of smell. So maybe we should actually have the the olfactory bulb in here as well. But the thalamus is going to route that sensory information to the appropriate cortical region. And this is why things that we see, hear, taste, and touch can trigger emotions. But again, also our sense of smell can trigger emotions as well. So maybe it should be included. Not quite sure how I would fit that into my picture of a hippo in a hat, though. Now, this image here is a recent review of brain imaging studies that indicated really no strong evidence that one particular area is a localization for emotions, or that even there's one area for happiness and one area for fear and one area for surprise. So if you look here, these are the different colors that were activated during different emotions. And you can see here for happiness, really widespread all over the brain. Same thing for disgust, widespread all over the brain. Current neuroscience research is suggesting that there's really not one area that we can say is involved in emotion, or multiple areas involved in emotion, such as the limbic system, that maybe it's connectivity between different brain regions that's really important. Now, we also have this researcher, Lisa Feldman Barrett, and she started off using Eckman's basic facial emotions, the facial expressions, that research to do work. I can't remember if it was for her PhD or her postdoctoral research, but she was basing her hypotheses off the idea that we have these universally identifiable facial expressions, and she couldn't replicate that in any way, shape, or form. And so she has now developed her own theory that also is similar to what many other neuroscientists propose, and we could call it the theory of constructed emotion, or psychological constructivism is sometimes what is also referred to. So if you think about your physiological responses to motion, how do you feel when you're afraid? Maybe a little jittery, your stomach might feel a little queasy, your heart beats faster, maybe you're a little shaky or sweaty. How do you feel when you're excited? Your heart beats a little faster, maybe you're a little shaky or sweaty, sometimes you get a little butterflies in your stomach. That's pretty much the same. So that's where this theory of constructed emotion comes into play. It suggests that when you're faced with a stimulus or situation, we're going to use prior knowledge, so this conceptual knowledge that's based on experiences, information from our body, and we're going to use that to produce an emotional reaction that involves a feeling, a behavior, or a reaction. So our feeling, our behavior, our facial muscles, our vocal acoustics. So much like our brain uses past experiences to take visual stimuli, so what hits our retina, and then put it back together in the brain to reconstruct that image the best that it can, this theory suggests that we take our past experiences, what we're currently facing in the situation, and the physiological arousal that we feel to construct an emotion that we're feeling in the moment. That our brain is basically predicting what's the right emotion to feel based on the situation, our personal experiences, and what's going on around us.